always, are you ready to jump into our first caller?
Heck yeah.
Sweet. All right. Isaiah, you are on the line with Martin and Ethan. How you doing?
Very well. Aloha, Martin and Ethan. Thank you for hosting and this opportunity to talk.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out and being willing to come on and engage with us. What was it you wanted to talk about?
So, yeah, I'll give you a real quick background, kind of my entry into this whole genre of atheism versus theism, that kind of thing. I had some, what I would call revelatory experiences when I was 18 to 22. They proceeded into dreams. I was shown different things. Anyway, that kind of cemented my beyond belief, more of an experiential faith that, yes, there is more than just what we perceive as this material reality around us. So I went through a very thirsty phase of going through all different religions, all mysticism, things like that, just collecting ideas and patterns and information, and also working on and my passion in the sciences and reading about cosmology and things like that. So for a long period of time, just collecting patterns, I started noticing fundamental patterns that were shared. And long story short, what I believe we have is a mythos. The mythos is handed down to us by like the Egyptians, Sumerians, these different, what seem to be very upstart cultures. They did have some fundamental grasp on universal truth, and what I think they passed down in mythos was an anthropomorphized version of it. So these universal truths were mythologized as the stories of the gods and goddesses, because that's what gets passed down through time in primitive cultures. So that's kind of my perspective.
Can I interject real quick?
So,
just with a clarifying question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when you say these mythos, you're referring to specific mythologies, like from certain cultures?
Yes, like one of them specifically from the Egyptian culture. One of their main creation stories is that before the universe arises, there was just the infinite oceanic body of Nun, which is the god. It's a god-goddess combination. But anyway, and within that oceanic body, a bubble pops open, and that's the universe. And in the middle of that is the primordial mound that Ra arises on. And then he names everything in the universe, and then everything arises inside the space that was created.
Did the Egyptians have the same concept of a universe as we did? I'm sorry to cut you off. I just want to kind of get to a more finite claim, I guess, if we will. And Ethan, feel free to jump in. You know.
No, please.
Yeah. So from what you can read of the story of Nun, N-U-N, is that before creation, or before a space exists for creation to exist, there was just this saturated infinite body of the god / goddess Nun, or Nun, and it's characterized as a watery body. And so a universe is like a bubble of void vacuum space that is opened up inside this infinite body, and what's called the primordial mound, or the original mountain or whatever, appears in the middle of it, and that's where Ra sits. And he, as the creator god in this story, speaks everything into being inside the universe, inside the bubble.
Okay,
so the universe is finite, and it's an expansion of space.
So what does that tell us? What conclusions are you drawing from all of that?
Well, that's just one interesting thing in going through like a logic, and this is what I've eventually developed over all the time as a model or a logistic of how these. I'll cut to the chase here.
Well, no, I don't want to rush you. I don't want to rush you through it. This is a nuanced topic for sure. I just want to understand if you're claiming that the Egyptian story is true, or if you're claiming that all of the stories are allegory.
From my perspective, they're mostly allegory. Not that it's true. It is what truth they had, how they chose to express it to the populace at the time, who just like we have here, people who aren't steeped in education or tradition of any type or whatever. Just a layman. I'm a layman myself. I started.
Oh, so are we? Yeah, we all are. I work in food service. I'm an expert of none.
I'm an arborist, by the way. That's my career. So I've got hands-on physics all day long, tumbling things down through the air and gravity and all that stuff. But anyway, back to where we're kind of starting.
Right.
Is oftentimes in theological arguments, it's from a book. It's about the characterization of God, the subjective nature, and all his moods, and all this stuff. And honestly, I find that really tedious and often abused. So that's where I kind of intentionally avoid it. So I was looking for what is the objective nature. If God actually physically, substantially exists, then what kind of effects does it, he, she, whatever have on the universe? So
let me ask you this.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do we? So it sounds like you're starting with God. How do we know God exists?
That's a great question. So God being a label, and about to describe what is behind that label that gets called God later on downstream. Okay.
So it's not a strict being in the sense of contained within one entity, whatever that entity may be. Obviously not human if it's God.
Right. Yes, and actually pure being, and this gets to the fundamental nature of the God concept that I'm working with.
Sorry, so that was a yes, it's an entity, or yes, it's not an entity. I asked the question in an unclear way.
Sure. Yes, it is an entity, but
okay.
Again, only in that it exists as an individual. In this logistic, I don't work on ascribing. I don't deny that it has a subjective existence, like any kind of mental or emotional state or something akin to it. It's still projecting human experience on that.
What's a subjective existence is something I want to ask, but I want you to continue. Just in a sec.
Yeah, well, it's like what we get from a lot of the Abrahamic literature and religions is that God is wrathful, jealous, and things like that. These human emotions ascribed to God that even if a person experiences something on the divine level, may still be projecting or experiencing whatever's happening through their own human nature. So it's one of those things that is really sticky. That is so easy for us to project on anything else. Plants, other people, we project our own ego onto it. So again, I'm sidestepping all of that. This is a logistic model of an objective God, of the infinite absolute, and it's well represented actually throughout antiquity. So we started with the Egyptian Noon, that's one of them. Brahman from the Hindu is another one. It's this infinite absolute existence that all things are derived from.
Ethan, do you want to jump in here, or should I?
Sorry,
I think we need to pause. I think we need to pause for a sec. We've covered a lot in those short few sentences.
Sure.
I'm trying to think where to go from here, because we're going in a few different directions. So as far as the Noon story being allegory, the people who wrote it and believed it didn't believe that it was allegory when they were writing it. They believed it was literally true, as far as I understand. Right. Well, so we're kind of retconning here a little bit and co-opting.
Yes, but also looking through the eyes of mystical tradition, that things are metaphor and allegory, and they're done that way for the wider audience. And the people,
but they're not done that way for the wider audience. You're interpreting them that way. That's you, the audience, interpreting them. That's not the intent of the writers.
Yes. Well, again, we can't know the intent, but I
well, you're right. But we know they literally believed it, and you do not literally believe it. So there is, and that doesn't invalidate your belief in your understanding of it. It's just something that I want to highlight, is that, the people who claimed this did not believe the same way about it that you do. Like you're picking up the story from it, whereas the actual story was very different.
Yeah, I definitely realize I'm doing that. I don't have a first-hand source that I can draw from, like actually hear their explanation of it in that time period. So, but again, it's just one of many that I draw from, and I'm looking for these essences I can distill down to get something workable. And the reason why I start with the Egyptian story, it actually contains this geometry that we start to find in scientific observation. In other words, the bubble is a pure sphere.
So
the hieroglyph for Ra's name.
Let me jump in for a second, just because I'm a little confused. So, did you say you're interpreting this stuff, this information, and then you're based off that interpretation determining that a god is plausible?
It's a number of different tactics that I've used to just try to make sense of the beginning of a universe. A very common one is something arising from nothing and different versions of nothing. Another is a finite singularity that then expands and makes all the stuff in the universe. What I've distilled all these God concepts back down to is an infinite singularity. It's an infinite field of pure being or pure substance taking up all available space in all directions forever.
So on a scale of like 1 to 10, 10 being the most confident, 1 being the least, or 10 being absolute certainty, how confident are you that God is real?
Well, I'll have to say 100% certain. Number one, well, no, I'll go 99.9 because my faith, I described as it being authored by the experiences I've had. It wasn't based on belief. It was things that were shown to me that they weren't created out of my own mind, even though some of them were in like an astral or a dream state. They were so lucid and so full of information that it got beyond the realm of belief or doubt for me. So,
I mean, I've received information in a dream too. I don't think that dreams are very credible for relating to the real world. That just always sticks out to me. I mean, it's your brain when it's not focused on anything and resting. That's what it is. Like, I mean, it's still on. It's just not headed in any direction, so the thoughts just kind of kick around. That's a very, very layman example.
And not just with dreams. Like, for instance, let's say, for example, I took mushrooms and I hallucinated.
Right.
Those experiences don't actually, like, for instance, say I think I saw God. Well, that doesn't mean there actually is a God. That just means I had this chemical reaction in my brain that made me think there was a God. So how do we go from
I'd like to speak to that real quick.
Sure.
So what we know from entheogens, they actually connect normally regions of the brain that normally don't talk to each other.
What was the noun in that sentence again? I'm sorry. What was the thing that is causing that? I missed the word.
The entheogens, mushrooms, anything with a psychoactive chemical or substance. And the other thing is that visually we only see something like 0.0035% of the visible spectrum, and that isn't a direct perception. It's done through the magnetics, basically, of your brain putting together all the information that it has available to it. And normally, our normal brain function is to filter out information so that we can think and have the space of thought and things like that in ourselves. What I'm saying is there are other states of mental perception that are just as valid as the one we normally perceive. And some call it astral projection or meditation. It's basically like a valence that your mind is able to go to and
here's my thing. Physical body. Here's my thing, just to jump in real quick.
Sure.
If you take mushrooms and see God, and I've never taken mushrooms personally. If I had, I would just talk about it, but I haven't.
I may or may not have.
Right. That's why I phrased what I said the way that I did. So my point being, if you see God on mushrooms and see God off of mushrooms, and God looks, not exactly the same, obviously, because you took mushrooms, sure, we can talk about that. But if you only see God in the altered state, then it's a function of the state before it's a function of reality. Unless you can show what sources or senses you're tapping into, just saying necessarily mean that it's real.
Yeah, I understand.
Let me
and that consideration.
Yeah. Go ahead.
As far as like exposure to a God level considered type being, let alone a seraphim or one of the mythological angels that are the burning ones around them, blah blah blah. how long can we stand in the presence of the sun or look at the sun? Just that alone, we need shade from it. We need space away from it, or else it would just destroy us. And there's, again, similar passages throughout different myths.
But what is that?
Full exposure to God.
But what does that have to do? Wait, what does the sun thing have to do with what we were talking about? Can you just connect the dots for me?
Sure. Okay. Experiencing God or revelatory events in our normal waking state of perception is too much for our brain to take. That is too much for our minds to.
How do you know that?
Again, to take. I've had a few that I had to get away from because it was too intense. I relived it and relived the experience when I went to sleep.
You had a few what? Are we talking about trips? What are we talking about?
No. Do you know what Shaktipat is? It's a Hindu term of the transfer of conscious energy from a guru to the students.
Shaktipat?
And basically, Shaktipat. It's the transfer of Shakti, or the transfer of energy.
I don't know what that is.
Okay. So it's like in the presence of someone who has done so much spiritual work, you can like feel their gravitas, if you will. Again, it's hard to explain.
Let me try to bridge the gap here. Is it kind of like when somebody really important walks into a room and everybody turns around and looks at them? Is that energy, or what are we talking? Can you give me an example of energy instead of just talking about how it's used? Like, what is energy doing something?
Like a really good professor who gets you excited about the understanding and the knowledge. You're like sit in rapt attention, and you can feel your mind and your soul. There's nourishment there. There's pattern, and that's what I mean by energy. There's a transferal of information that your system, brain, whatever, all of it working together recognizes as useful.
Yeah, pattern recognition. We do that as humans, and animals do that too. We know animals can recognize patterns.
So I'm saying there are different emergent levels of us being able to do that. One of the primitive ones is verbally speaking these things. There are higher ones where they are direct.
What about animals that use? Well, never mind. Sorry, that's unrelated. Continue.
So that's kind of what awoke in the journey in me, and I wasn't able to take that much consciousness at the time. It felt like my own awakening experience felt like God's eye opened up underneath the level of my consciousness and around me, everywhere, and my ego was transparent between the two, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time.
So,
which is like one of the.
Let me ask you this.
It rings so true to me because it wasn't just this happy elation, like La La Land kind of thing. It was stark reality that I had to face.
Okay, so let me ask you this: why should we think this is anything happening outside of your brain?
Right.
Because it sounds like if I was to boil your argument down right now, at least how I'm hearing it, and please, if I am wrong, correct me. It sounds like most of it comes down to if you have feelings for God, or I had this feeling / revelation for God, therefore God is true. Is that accurate?
No. I was just describing to you some of my subjective experience, and actually I could go into one.
Yeah, that was only about energy. That wasn't even about God, I don't think.
So then how do we, if we could jump back to God?
The first claim. Sorry, I took us on a tangent there.
That's okay. How do we, like me, the layman, what evidence do you think would convince me that God is indeed real?
Well, that gets back to the objective. My approach as far as arguing this, as far as like a convincing conversation, is through the method, the scientific model. It's a comprehensive theory with a bunch of different data sets that all point to the same thing, being more plausible than our current paradigm. And it actually incorporates several of them. One of them is the Big Bang Theory. It goes right along the expansion of space, even describes the trajectory of a universe as far as its rapid expansion, then sudden cessation of that expansion, and then slower increase in expansion on the inside. That's what I use for externally sharing these things. I don't really share my subjective experiences because they aren't transferable.
Okay, so how is that the universe expanding evidence for God?
Okay, so getting back to what we're starting with as God, we have to start with something.
Why do we? Sorry, Isaiah. Why do we have to start with something?
You have to start with some kind of premise for an argument. Oh, and specifically,
well, no, I don't think that's
because I find
something he meant.
Well, I find that starting with something is more useful than starting with nothing. So,
right, and I get like,
what is nothing?
It's a finite thing.
Who's starting with nothing, and what is nothing?
That's a great question. I find it kind of a dead and boring pursuit. A lot of it is
I don't know what it is.
Plus nothing. It's not. It's a concept we apply to make sense of causation. I think it's like things begin to exist, so we think they must come from nothing.
What things have begun to exist in your lifetime?
Well, I'm not arguing that. So
no, I'm asking you what things have come to exist in your lifetime. Like, give me an example of things, because things is really broad. I'm trying to get down to terms we can talk about. Has anything come to exist in your lifetime under what you're talking about coming to exist?
I would say no, except for conscious emergence, which is where I've gotten to different levels of being able to understand things and be able to execute them well, like climbing and trimming a tree or whatever, the different things we learn.
So metaphysical things, right? Okay. So right. Sorry, I was referring to physical things because you're talking about physical things when you say nothing, right? You're not talking about conceptual things.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So
nothing physical has come to exist in your lifetime or mine. Just assuming we're within 100 years of each other.
No, I pretty much go by the second law of thermodynamics, that energy is neither created nor destroyed; it only changes forms. So,
in a closed system.
In a closed system.
Is the universe a closed system?
That's a great question. I think it's semi-permeable, and that's through the field, the Higgs field, that spans through everything.
So wait, if you think that it's semi-permeable, then it's not a closed system. So why are you arguing from the second law of thermodynamics if it's not a closed system?
Because it emerges from a system, a medium, this infinite body.
Well, infinity is not. Infinity is actually antithetical to a closed system, because if you can't measure it, you can't know if it's closed. And so it would be improper to say that something that is infinite is also a closed system.
That's an interesting argument.
I know it is. It's something that I think about a lot. Yeah. Actually, I'm really enthralled with this, dude. I'm glad you called.
So let's dive right into infinity.
Yeah. What's infinity?
This is great.
Unless Ethan might have something to say. Sorry, I've been talking a lot.
That's okay. We do. So we do have to wrap up this conversation with a couple minutes. So, but if you want to go into infinity, maybe let's keep it 3 minutes.
Real quick, let's talk about it. The infinity you were talking about, Isaiah.
Okay, so I'll go from infinity to a single universe to an atom in those steps. So infinity. How do you make a voided space in infinity? You've got this saturated ocean of pure substance. Think of the initial singularity of the Big Bang as a quantum field. It goes forever in all directions. How do you make a voided space? What's the simplest possible shape? It's a sphere. It's like a bubble cavitating underwater. Now, considering equal opposite reaction, if it moves outward to make that voided space, it also has to move inward to the center of that space. Equal opposite reaction, it's balance, it's a relativistic balance. of periphery and center. So
that's a lot of claims. That's a lot of claims. You claim that the sphere is the most common shape, or it's easy to make shape. It depends on what tool you're working with. There's a lot of claims in there. So continue, but just know that I'm not agreeing with my silence.
Sure. Well, the sphere would be formed by a single radian, a single measure from a single point in all rotations, in all possible angles, rather than it's more simpler than a square. Some of the latest cosmological evidence shows that we have a spherical universe. But again, back to the logic here. Equal opposite reaction forms a spherical border condition, a probability space in between, and a nuclear center of the actual universe. Now, think of this as a three-dimensional vibrating container, okay? It has a field strung in between. This is a spherical vibrating container. If you have a circular bucket full of water and you vibrate it, you get circular internal waves. With this spherical container, with a concentrated nuclear point, you get spherical waveforms with a nucleus, and that makes atoms. That is the fundamental quanta for the
okay, I don't know enough about quantum physics to know how atoms are made. I'm just going to ask real quick, and I'm not going to just swat you down if you don't have any, but do you have any professional experience in this field, or are you speaking from what you've learned on your own?
Yeah, I'm speaking from what I've learned on my own.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a high school education. I'm not formally educated in the sciences.
Same.
But,
I've
been in a college, but I didn't graduate. So same, dude. I got you.
Yeah, I'm just I'm a college dropout and a former DJ. So, yeah.
No worries. Yeah, so that's the first thing. In this model, because it's an expression of infinity, so basically in the theological terms, infinity is self-expressed, and infinite universes are the result. There's a vibrational cavitation. If you want to think about it mythologically, God said, "I am." Just basically woke up one day and said, "I exist," and that was a creative decree. And an infinite number of finite individuals appeared, and those are universes. And I think they're also souls. We're basically all our own universes in development. We collect information. We have.
Well, I don't know what a soul is, so I think we got to pause here.
Isaiah, yeah, you threw like a.
I know what people claim souls are. I don't know what a soul is.
So real quick, Isaiah, we do have to wrap this up.
Sure.
But this has actually been a very good conversation, and I would like you, if you're interested, to call back again the following week. But if possible, maybe like we could focus more on specific evidence. Like for instance, for me, like
that's. For sure. Yeah, I would love to. I can get down to the specific evidence this model predicts and what the structures arise in the model, why they do, really simply. And then where down the list of what we found in science, including my main one is gravity and dark energy. Those values, those percentages are stark in a universe model. And
I wish we had more time today.
I know.
I can give you the math for it too. It's easy stuff.
Well, this would actually, if you're willing to call back next week, Isaiah, we actually have a science nerd, Brain Bug, coming on.
Yeah,
and I think he would be the excellent person to continue this conversation with.
Cool. Would love that. And
and I'll be listening.
More, especially from people that are more educated than I am.
Awesome. Thanks, Isaiah. I appreciate you taking the time to call in and speak with us. And I hope
on that real quick, I've never heard somebody cite information from somebody less educated than them. Just pointing that out. So when you say that they're more educated than you and you're citing them, it's implied.
Awesome. Thank you, Isaiah.
All right. Well, thank you both. You're welcome. Thank you, Ethan. And yeah, let's do this again next week.
Sweet. Have a good one.
Take care.